Hello and welcome to Heather TV. I am Heather Broadbent, first violinist of Quartet Saint-Ace and founder of Composer Corner. I'm so excited today to introduce you to Malcolm Dedman, our special guest and composer. Malcolm, hello.
Hello, Heather. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, Malcolm. How are you doing?
I'm very fine, and good day to everyone who's listening.
Thank you so much. So Malcolm Dedman, let me introduce everyone to Malcolm Dedman here. He's a British composer currently living in South Africa, and he was born in 1948 in London. And I found Malcolm online, was very attracted to his music. I actually found Malcolm on Reverberation and started listening to his music and really honestly just fell in love with his composition, so I had to reach out to him. And Malcolm, I just want to thank you so much for responding and for being a part of this interview today.
You're welcome.
So Malcolm, one of my favorite questions I like to ask musicians that I interview and composers that I interview, what is your first musical memory?
Okay, it's not a big deal. It was just my mother playing in my very early days at home on the piano. That's all I can really say at the moment.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So obviously you had some, your mother was a pianist, and could you tell us a little bit about what is your main instrument?
Well, around about that time, I was about 5 years old at the time, my mother taught me piano and how to read music. However, around the age of 8, I had the opportunity of learning the violin at school. So I would say that violin is my main instrument, as I discontinued piano lessons. I did continue to play violin in my teens and joined a local youth orchestra and played some chamber music with friends and so on. But I also sung in various choirs during my teenage years, and this resulted in my starting singing lessons, so that became an instrument as well. I was in much demand in amateur choirs as a tenor, as you can probably well imagine. Later in my adult life, I was a member of the BBC Symphony Chorus for about 6 years.
Oh, that's wonderful. So, incredible background with violin and piano and singing, and I'm sure that added all to your composing. So, please tell us, when did you decide and how did you come about to compose your first composition?
Well, that went right back from once I started to get a reasonable piano technique, not that it was very wonderful at that stage as a child, but once I could find my way around the piano, I started to improvise. And that was something which I'd rather did rather than practicing what I should have been practicing. The limited technique that I had, and the fact that I only knew diatonic music at the time, these improvisations were rather naive. But I did dream of being discovered by someone who would write down my improvisations. Now, that never happened, actually, but by the time I was 12, I'd taught myself to write music down, and my first composition was actually called Thunderstorm. This was a rather dramatic piece for violin and piano, but nevertheless a rather naive composition, which I wouldn't consider as being one of mine today.
This is so wonderful to hear, because I really stress with musicians, violinists, classical musicians, the importance of improvising and creating. And here, your story proves that through these your improvisations, you became a composer. It was like the first step.
It was the first step, and occasionally I would go to the piano even as an adult and try something out, and it became an improvisation, and I was able to establish what, the way forward in a composition. But I don't write at the piano, and generally speaking anyway. And but the improvisation was more the stepping stone towards the composition stage.
That's wonderful.
In my case.
Excellent. So why do you compose, and what is your spark or inspiration to composing?
Well, composition is not a choice one makes. Any composer doesn't sort of make that choice because it's a calling. To me, in simplistic terms, music comes to me. I cannot help this. And once the music comes, it has to be written down. Later on in my life, I had to learn that the art of composition is 20% inspiration and as much as 80% perspiration or working out. So my early years were naturally naive until I started listening to new music on radio and discovering new sounds, and that were not part of my sort of upbringing, my parents' understanding. I also learned a lot about how music is put together, the process of composition during these years. This initially inspired me to write down more music and write for the church, my school, and my friends, and so people I knew. But now my inspiration is to write music that has a message that can be communicated by sound. Communication is the most important point here, as I believe that much of the avant-garde music over the last 70 or so or more years has alienated audiences. And this has unfortunately given new music a bad name. I wish to bring audiences back to new music. I would like to add here that I did not take up music, performing or composing as a career path. All my career advisors told me it wouldn't make any money. Unfortunately, I believed them. However, I did have, as it were, a second string to my bow. Please excuse the pun. At school, I was very interested in physics. After school, I took my honours degree in applied physics, and after university, this degree gave me the ticket to work as an electronic engineer in research and development departments, various companies, designing circuits and software. I found out that this did not pay too well either. But that's by the way. This came to an end after 20 years in 1991, when I then started to teach music in schools and privately, which I still do to this day.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I should say also at this point that I took a master's degree in 2005, passed in 2006, in composition, and that has really launched my, what I would say, serious career as a composer.
Okay, that's excellent. And tell us a little bit more about your pieces specifically written for violin and friends.
Okay. Well, I would say that since moving to South Africa and so on, since I had the qualification, I have been very lucky to have much more time to write. And during this time, I have written a number of pieces involving violin. And these include 2 violin solos. One is called Dispelling the Darkness, and one is called Monologues. 3 pieces for violin and piano, and they're called Universal Love, Dance of Africa, and The Labyrinth. And these are very different pieces. And 2 for violin and harp, Journey of the Soul, and Uncharted Territories. Again, very different styles and pieces in a way. I've also written an ensemble piece called Eternal Harmonies, with an important part for violin solo. I've also got much chamber music that includes important parts for violin, including a piano trio and 2-string quartets. Strings in general, and violin in particular, feature very strongly in my output. I think this is because I learned the violin as a child.
Definitely. And I have to add, I absolutely love your Dance of Africa. It's so beautiful.
Oh, thanks for that. Thank you.
So, what do you think is the connection between music and spirituality, if any?
Well, there is a connection, definitely. And as you can tell from some of my titles, this connection is very important to me. However, I should say that not all music makes this connection, neither does it intend to. In addition, every individual is different, so one piece will communicate on a spiritual level to some, but not to others. It's like an energy stream. Music comes like an energy, and if that energy can't be received on a spiritual level by some, it won't be communicated, but it will be by those that can receive it. To illustrate this a little bit more, I'd like to add this. In Stravinsky's life, he told us that music can't express anything. He said that music is composed of notes forming melody, rhythm, and harmony, and so on. And this seems in opposition to many people's view on music. But I think what he meant was that a composer's writing a piece should, say about a particular place or event, may produce sounds that suggest this to him or her as the composer. But this music could easily be used in a totally different context. That is, the music does not necessarily express or communicate the idea in the composer's mind at the time of its writing. In contrast to this, Mahler has said that if he could not express his ideas in words, he would not, sorry, if he could express his ideas in words, he would not need to write music. These two statements seem to be opposing, one saying that music cannot be expressed or expressive, and the other saying that it can only express that which can't be communicated in words. But in a way, I can see both points of view. In my view, music is capable of expressing concepts that are difficult or even impossible to express in words. At the same time, it's also about melodic and rhythmic motives and how these can be developed. In general, art, and especially music, can communicate very strong emotions that are very difficult to express in words. But more importantly for me, it can, not always, it can communicate on a spiritual level, which is quite impossible to express verbally. But every listener will receive the music differently, depending on their background and understanding. And as I say, being able to accept and receive the energy from the music.
It's absolutely beautiful.
Okay.
Tell us about your personal connection between music and spirituality.
Well, as a teenager, I heard a great deal of new music, and one of the composers, amongst many I grew very interested in, was the composer Olivier Messiaen. I think the first recording I ever bought was La Nativité, but I also heard much of his music because it was just being introduced into the UK at the time. And trumpeted liturgy and various other pieces in particular really made a huge impact on me. And this was on a spiritual level. I do not always agree with Messiaen's strongly Catholic viewpoints and interpretations, even though I was baptized and confirmed in the Church of England. But the music spoke to me more personally on a spiritual level than anything else I had ever heard. Since then, I have explored other composers who communicate spiritually, and one example at that time was Britain's War Requiem, which has a very spiritual connection with the peace at the end.
And has spirituality always been a theme in your compositions, or did you have a turning point in your composing career?
No, it wasn't. I mean, when I was a child, when I started writing music, I didn't have the techniques to be able to see this. So before I could discover how to communicate in this way, I had to write and develop a lot and find my own true voice, and that takes time. I did write music for the church at the time, but I have later realized that this is not especially spiritual, and this is, I believe, because religion and spirituality are not necessarily the same thing. In 1975, a little later, I wrote a Christmas cantata, which was performed in Birmingham, and I found this possessed a spiritual connection. And likewise, a year later, I wrote a mass for the church I was attending at the time, and this was for choir and two percussionists, and I felt very similarly about this. However, my turning point was much more gradual rather than a specific time. In the late 70s and early 80s, I started writing instrumental pieces in which I wanted to communicate a spiritually connected message, one work being Supplication for Peace for two guitars. Also, my first string quartet is very much about overcoming struggle and violence, so that peace could be established in the end. Later, pieces with spiritual connection in some way, for me anyway, include two reflections, my second piano sonata, subtitled In Search, Four Kinds of Love, all for the piano solo, and the Supplication for Peace, which I mentioned earlier. Also, Three Human Attributes, which is a reflection on our body, mind, and soul, which I wrote for piano duet. And there's much more. The piece I've just completed is my second string quartet, and this is subtitled Five Aspects of Spirit.
Oh, wonderful. I'm excited about this second string quartet. Can you tell us, what are the five aspects of spirit?
They start with, the string quartet is in five movements, and we start with a movement on the spirit of vegetable spirit. The second movement is animal spirit. Then the third movement moves up a stage to the human spirit. Then we look at the spirit of faith in the fourth movement, and finally the Holy Spirit in the fifth movement. A very calm and beautiful piece.
Excellent. So, Malcolm, do you think world peace is possible, and are we currently on this path? If so, what steps as individuals can we take to encourage the process?
This is a big question and very, very interesting. Many people are rather negative about the possibility of world peace, so I need to reflect on this for a while. We need to look at scripture to get some answers, not only that of the Bible, but that of other religions. I'd like to just deviate here slightly, if I may, by saying that, as I already mentioned, I was raised as a Christian, but I gradually moved away from going to church around 1982. I realized that for quite a while I had been put off the church by the disunity between the various Christian churches. So around about 1986, I embraced a faith that expressed my ideas more precisely, that being the Baha'i faith. And I soon discovered that a strong Baha'i concept is the unity of religion and the oneness of God. It's not a separate religion, there is only one religion. The founder, Baha'u'llah, revealed to us the scriptures that are as equally divinely inspired as any other scripture, such as the Holy Bible. And he expressed in these scriptures very clearly that world peace is not only possible, but it is inevitable. If we look at the Lord's Prayer revealed by Christ, he says, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." And as the Baha'i writings tell us that it is God's will for his earth to be a peaceful place, then God's will shall surely be done. Thy will be done. I know this is difficult to believe, as there is so much uncontrolled conflict in the world. But the writings do state that conditions would need to get worse before they can improve. And we're at that stage at the moment where, in certain areas at any rate, conditions have got worse. So I believe that things can only get better. Baha'u'llah has revealed to us a set of very important tasks that mankind must work at in order that the peace process can begin. And I'll try and put some of these into my own words. This is a huge text, but this is an abbreviation. Peace can only happen once prejudice is banished. Prejudice of religion, of race, and colour in particular. This can be achieved through education, and both men and women should achieve the highest level of education possible. People must understand one another and be tolerant of one another without prejudice. There will always be conflict between people, as we are all different. We should be able to freely express our differences, refer to freedoms of speech and human rights and so on. But if we can all accept one another's differences, not just accept, but celebrate the fact we are all different, all individual, and then the conflict that might arise will be under control. Controlled conflict is better than uncontrolled conflict. Uncontrolled will produce war and fighting in general. I do hope this makes sense, but we must remember that education is the key to acceptance. It is well worth remembering the phrase unity in diversity. That's very important to me.
That's absolutely beautiful, and thank you so much for sharing that with us, Malcolm. And
that's a pleasure. You're welcome.
Yes, there's many times that I find in my own journey with the violin, with my life, that the truth lies in simplicity, and I think what you just expressed there is a very simple truth, that what will be in heaven will be on earth.
It is simple, but there are also complexities. I will say that Heather is much more involved than I just said. Anybody who wants to look at this further can search for the Baha'i faith on the website and find a lot of the teachings on peace and unity.
So Malcolm, can you please share with us, what do you think is the role of music on the path to world peace?
Well, the 20th century has shown that music can most certainly express conflict, but more importantly, music is capable of showing how conflict can be resolved. And this is what I generally aim to do in my compositions. Of course, people have to listen, and if the music is effective, this will generate thoughts and discussions in the listener, which I believe will aid understanding. Just one word of warning though, There's far too much music out there today that does none of this. So please don't expect that listening to all of the noise and music that you get in the shops and all the music that you can never get away from, don't expect this to bring about peace, because it won't. It has to be music, to my mind, that is written with this purpose in mind. Such as, I mentioned Britain's War Requiem. It's not about war, it is about the futility of war and how this can be overcome into peace. Music can often express love, unity, and harmony, and I've done this in many of my pieces. It can express the resolution of conflict. But we need to look back at another great composer, Messiaen, who I've mentioned before. In his organ cycle, Les Chants Glorieux, there's the movement called Combat de l'amour et de la vie, to excuse the French pronunciation, please. But that movement does show the process of resolving conflict very, very effectively.
Finally, Malcolm, what is the role of spirituality on this path to world peace?
Okay, well, they're both very strongly interlinked. It all depends on your individual view of spirituality. One can learn a lot from the Buddhists in this respect by meditating and by searching for this thing they call enlightenment. This, I believe, is the path to being a better person, to be, in fact, the best person we can be in everything we do. Once we commit ourselves to this, we become more spiritually aware. And by being that better person, we can be more loving to our fellow humans, to animals, and to nature, and to whatever higher being we believe in, which most of us call God. I sometimes call this the universal mind. We will then realize, only then, that peace starts with ourselves, then to those around us, our families, our friends, our colleagues. Then the process will expand to our individual countries, and eventually the whole world will be a better place to live in, and peace will be the result. But the process starts with us as individuals, and according to the science of mind, we ourselves must think positively. If we think negative thought, this will be radiated out and will become self-fulfilling. It will be like a prayer and will result in negative consequences. Conversely, a positive thought, also a prayer, will in time become self-fulfilling and have positive consequences. There's a lot for us to do, and we do have a long way to go, but the teachings are available for all to see. First, the most important thing, we need to believe it is all possible.
I came across you for a reason online with Quartet Synthèse because our missions and objectives seem to line up very well. Quartet Synthèse, our mission and objective is to bring cultures together through music and to bring about world peace one note at a time. And I know it sounds really big, and you know, some people may think that's an impossibility, but I don't, and I'm just so glad that that we've connected. So thank you so much, Malcolm.
Well, let's work together and make it possible. Thanks very much for your time, and thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. And it's been an absolute pleasure to interview you and to get to know you more as a musician, composer, and person. So I think without further ado, we'll say goodbye to the listeners and thank them for listening. So until we see you again online, Malcolm and I both say be true, be you, be. Ciao for now. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.